So the next pastry we're going to go on with, which is the top pastry, which is, it's a Ruff puff. It's a Ruff butter puff. So to do this pastry, there's a bit of work in it, but again, if you follow the recipe and follow and stick to the measurements, then you shouldn't have too many problems. And the great thing about this pastry is you can use it for other dishes. You can make banana strudel with it, jam turnovers, Cornish pasties. So, okay. Once again, we're going to start with 250 mils of flour. So, 0 off your scales. It's 250 grams of flour. We'll just sift that into the bowl. I want half a teaspoon of salt. Again, this is the local salt. Now, with the puff, this is a butter puff, and I have to keep some of this butter quite hard, yeah? So, but in saying that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 220 grams of butter. I'm going to have to cut 25% of that through the flour and do resemble the fine breadcrumbs. Then the other butter, I have to reserve that, and I'm going to slice that thinly, and later on that's going to be layered over the pastry. That's going to be the foundation of making the layers when we do the book folds. My unsalted butter. Now I've kept this in the freezer. It's quite hard. So what you can do, the 25%, let's take off, because we only want 220 grams, yeah? So let's bring our zeroed back scales, and we want 200 grams, correction, 200 grams. So we'll just, that's pretty spot on, yeah, from the 227, yeah? So we take this bit off, yeah, put that to a side, use it later on. So I'll take that off. And I want to take 25% to put through the mix. So that's about 25%, yeah? So I'll keep that bit there. Now this remaining butter, I'll just whack that back in the freezer, and because I want to keep that hard.
Ready when you are.
So what we're going to do now is we've got 25% of the butter from the 200 grams of butter, and we're going to put that through our flour. And we're going to rub it like we did in the first pastry till it resembles fine breadcrumbs. So I'm just working it through with my fingers first, just till it starts to blend with that butter. And then when I feel that it started to blend, then I'll start rubbing it through the palms of the hands. This is a reasonably easy pastry to knock up. So puff pastry historically has been a pastry that I suppose in the house you probably wouldn't make. In fact, even a lot of commercial food outlets don't make their puff pastry now. It's It's not a difficult pastry. It's like most things, as long as you follow the recipe and follow the steps, then it should come out okay. So you can see now that's starting to resemble those fine breadcrumbs, yeah? So what we're going to add next is 150 ml of cold water. And with this recipe, after we've added that 150 ml, it's going to be quite wet, yeah? And we'll work it out on the bench, and we'll have a floured bench. So don't be too overly concerned if it's too wet. You see the fine breadcrumbs? So now we have the flour and the butter. We've cut that butter through, and we have what resembles fine breadcrumbs. So we have 150 mils of cold water. Yeah. So again, it's really important we get the measurements right. We've set our scales back to 0, and as mentioned before, 1 mil equals 1 gram. 1 gram equals 1 mil. So if we want 150 mils of water, we measure out 150 grams on our scales. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so with this one, we add this in, say, 3 equal portions. So I'm just going to sprinkle a bit over the top, then I'm going to work that through. And pretty much the same as when we did the bottom pastry, once it leaves the bowl and clings together, yeah, as a pastry, then we're there. See, I just added that little bit of flour, and it's picked that back up already. So this is basically what we want. So the recipe that will be at the end of this film will reflect the correct quantities of water that will be required. So that's pretty much what we want. Again, we'll just knock that into a square so we can roll that out. So we've rested up that flour for half an hour, and what we want to do now is we want to put out a floured board. So again, we'll just sprinkle some of this flour onto the bench, rub it around, take our pastry, place it down. Now, ideally, what we want to do is we want to try and roll this out so that we get a rectangle. So I have the rolling pin, and I'm just going to try and roll that out to try and maintain as best a rectangle as we can, yeah? So later on, what we'll do is we're going to layer the butter on top. So we roll that out to around 10 millimetres or 1 centimetre. So that's not a bad rectangle. Like, I mean, it could be better, but that's not bad. And I'll just roll that up there, put the flour back underneath. See how I rolled it up onto the rolling pin itself? Then I'll just roll that back out again. So that's about 10 mil. Might even be a little bit under 10 mil, but you know, it's not going to be the end of the world. So that probably is a bit under 10 mil. Probably about 7.5 mil. So you can see that well floured. Okay. So what we're going to, we take the butter from the freezer, the other 75% of that 200 gram butter block. We're going to slice it thinly and layer it over the top of the pastry. So we've taken our flour, our butter from the freezer, and what we're going to do now is we're just going to cut it into thin slices and layer the butter over our pastry. What I'm going for is thin slices, yeah? The thinner I can slice the butter now, the easier it will form layers when we roll the pastry. So what it's called dotting the pastry with butter, and we're going to do it to within 10 millimetres of each edge. So I suppose in some ways this is, you know, one of the areas within making puff pastry that people find a little bit daunting, yeah? So So to me that's fine, yeah? That's 150 grams of butter sliced thinly and laid across the top of that pastry. But after that, what we're going to do here is I'm just going to sift a bit more of this flour into this pan. You don't need to measure this out because this is flour that we're just going to use to work with, yeah? So I would say you'd probably use another 250 grams of flour when we work this flour through, yeah? So I've just sifted that and I'm going to dust the top of that, yeah? Very lightly dust the top of where I put that butter. So you can see it hasn't covered all of the butter. It's just like, I suppose, when you're going to dust with icing sugar. Yeah, so we've just dusted the top of that butter. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to fold it over. There's a couple of folds. There's a book fold. There's a freeway fold. So it doesn't really matter what sort of a fold you do, but we're just going to fold it over. So on this first one I'm going to do, I think this is a book fold. So I'll go into the centre, like so. I'll bring the other side in, like so. Yeah, I'll put a bit of pressure on that, just push that down a little bit. Just with the hands. Now what I want to do is, I want to bring both those ends back over again. So, like so. Now that's what I know as a book fold. The idea is to try and keep all those sides even, yeah? I'm just pushing that down with my hands, applying pressure. What we don't want, or what we try to avoid, is we don't want the flour coming through. Now look, if it comes through a little bit, it doesn't matter. Keep it well floured. We're just pushing down with the hands. Okay, I'm going to take this excess flour away now, and then I'm going to roll that out, yeah? Again, we want to try and keep an oblong, rectangular shape. Now with this pastry we should rest it for 10 to 15, 20 minutes between folds. You see my rolling technique? I've got my hands on top of the pin. I'm not using the handles. You can use the handles. Okay, so a bit of butter's come through there. So we'll just flour over the top of that, yeah? That'll be okay. Again, we've got down to about 10 mil. This is a rough puff, so we don't have to be overly pedantic with our folds. We've got it down to, that's just a little bit under 10 mil there. So again, I'm coming into the centre, a bit of butter there. Bring this one into the centre. Light flour. I'm folding back over again. Yeah, ideally, you probably should rest that for 10, 15 minutes between folds. It's a rough puff. Again, see a little bit of that butter coming through. And I suppose in resting that would help, but look, as I was saying before, this is a rough puff, so I just sprinkle a bit of flour over those areas where that butter's coming through. It should only happen on the first couple of folds. Look how that's folded. That's great. See how that's coming out now? That's great. That's what we want, yeah? So here we are. We're just back down below 10 mil again. And we're ready to do another fold, yeah? I'm just rubbing a little bit of that excess flour off. I still want flour on the top there. Yeah, that's reasonably square, yeah? So, I think on this one, we won't do a book, yeah? Anyway, there's another fold. We can do just folding the three, such as that. You see that? So, we've rolled it out 4 or 5 times. We've rested it 10 minutes between folds. And now we look at the pastry. And if we can see that the butter has blended through and we have one colour, then pretty much that's all we need to do on the folds. Remember, this is a rough puff, a rough butter puff for the top of the meat pies, yeah? So the final fold, my final book, into the centre, over. And I'm going to push that down a bit. I'm going to give it a little bit of a roll. And this will be the final fold, yeah? And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to rest it for an hour, minimum hour. You know, these rough butter puffs, if you can rest it for 2 to 3 hours in the refrigerator, all the better. For me, I'm going to rest it for an hour because I'm going to get my sauce on the go, yeah? So, that's it, yeah? I take a plate, lightly floured. I'm going to lift my puff up. I'm going to place it on the plate. And I'm going to put it in the refrigerator and rest it for an hour.